Cuisinart Presents Patently Easy Food Processor Cooking with your host, Greg Patent.
Hi, I'm Greg Patent, and welcome to my kitchen. On today's show, we'll be working with cheese, and I'll be making a savory cheese roll, a delicious cheddar cheese fondue, a fontina gougere, and also a feta cheese souffle, all with a food processor. Cheese rolls are really an American institution, and the one I'm going to make is a little bit special because it uses cottage cheese to substitute for the cream cheese, so we're really lowering the fat content, and it's very, very easy to make. With a metal blade in place, you put 6 ounces of cheddar cheese that you've cut into 1-inch pieces into the work bowl. The cheese can be at room temperature or it could be refrigerated. It really doesn't matter. And then we'll process this by pulsing a few seconds. And then let the motor run for about 30 seconds to puree the cheese. And what you want really is for the cheese to be very, very finely chopped. And then we'll just add the remaining ingredients. 3 ounces of crumbled blue cheese, 6 ounces of cottage cheese, that measures 3/4 of a cup, generous sprinkling of Tabasco sauce, of course according to taste, and then we'll let this run for about 30 seconds. And where this cheese roll differs from so many cheese rolls is that, first of all, there's no butter, and also we are cutting back on the fat by using cottage cheese instead of the cream cheese. So you want to let this process until it's very, very smooth, and you should stop to scrape the work bowl as necessary. And as you do that, you will see how smooth the mixture is. And then when it's really smooth, take this sticky-looking mixture that I'm pouring in here. What this is a teaspoon of gelatin that I sprinkled over 1.5 teaspoons of water and this little custard cup. Now I set this into a small saucepan with hot water and let this mixture dissolve. And then you let this run for a few seconds. And the reason we're putting the gelatin in here is because there is no butter or really high-fat cheese in here. The gelatin is used to help set the mixture. And that's it. Very, very fast. In order to shape this mixture, you scrape it out of the bowl onto a sheet of plastic wrap that has been either sprayed with a nonstick spray or lightly oiled. And sometimes you have to fight with this just to make sure that it doesn't go all over the place. Now scrape most of this cheese mixture out of the work bowl, then I will show you a little trick to get the work bowl really clean without too much effort. Make sure the blade is firmly seated in the bottom of the work bowl. After you've scraped most of the cheese mixture out, turn the motor on for just about a second or so. The blade is spun clean, and then you can take your plastic scraper and scrape the rest of the mixture out. And all you really need to do from here is to use this plastic as a guide. Roll the cheese up in the plastic. This is a sticky mixture, so just roll it up in the plastic and close it completely. Then you can just pat it into shape. What you want to do is shape this into a roll about 9 inches long and 2 inches in diameter. And once it's all rolled up like this, then you refrigerate it for about an hour to solidify it. And then you take it out and you roll it in about a 1/2 cup of chopped walnuts or parsley, depending upon how calorie conscious you are. You let it set in the refrigerator for several hours or overnight, and then you can serve it just as we do on this platter right here. This is the log that has been shaped and refrigerated and rolled in walnuts, and then this is really good to serve with crackers or with bread. And for an appetizer, this will serve a good 6 to 8 people. Fondue is the national dish of Switzerland, and the word fondue, F-O-N-D-U-E, means melted. And of course, you all know Swiss fondue as having Swiss cheese and maybe some Appenzeller cheese in it. This particular fondue has beer and cheddar cheese. It's made in the food processor, and because it's made in the food processor, it turns out not to be stringy. so it can hold its heat really well, and then you can dip it at your leisure for several minutes and it will not get stringy on you. And that's one of the best reasons for making fondue with the processor. Also, it's extremely quick. To do it, have the metal blade in place, put 1 pound of cheddar cheese that you've cut into cubes in the work bowl, pulse a few times to start the process of chopping, and then you want to let the motor run until the cheese is finely chopped, about 10 seconds or so. And then towards the end of processing, add a tablespoon of cornstarch and a ½ teaspoon of dry mustard, and process this for a few seconds more. There's also a ½ teaspoon of sugar in there. And then while this is happening, heat up 1 cup of beer to boiling along with 1 tablespoon of butter. Start the motor and pour the boiling liquid through the feed tube. And you see what this does is it melts the cheese right in the work bowl. And it happens so quickly. And you want to stop after a few seconds, scrape the work bowl well, and then let this process again for a few seconds. And then once the cheese is thoroughly melted and everything is smooth, then all you do is just simply return this mixture to the saucepan, secure the blade in place from below, and there we go. Put this back on the heat. This should be on medium heat. Stir it until it thickens and coats a spoon fairly heavily. And while it's thickening, add about a ½ teaspoon of Worcestershire sauce and again several squirts of Tabasco. Tabasco and cheese go very, very well together. So just keep cooking and stirring it until it thickens. When the cheese is melted, you see how nice and thick it is and how smooth. Just pour it into a serving bowl, and what I've done is I've put the serving bowl right in the middle of a platter with a number of different vegetables and also some ham cubes. These are just some suggestions as to what might go with this fondue. But if you want to serve it for a group this way, this makes a very festive way of doing things. This is perfect for, say, a light snack late at night or for an informal party. I have some ham cubes around the outside, cherry tomatoes, blanched cauliflower, and also some blanched broccoli flowerets. Just make sure you have enough dipping foods for everybody. Raw mushrooms would also be nice. And also make sure you provide your guests with dipping forks so they can spear the food, dip it into the fondue, and then enjoy it to their heart's content. Serve this with beer or a dry white wine. And this amount of fondue will certainly serve about 4 to 6 people. A gougère is a delicious, cheesy and eggy pastry made with puff shell dough. The original recipe comes from Burgundy in France, and usually Gruyere cheese is put into gougère. I'm going to make it with fontina this time. Fontina cheese actually comes from a couple of different places. There's an Italian fontina, and there's also a Danish or even a Swedish fontina. It comes in a wheel. You buy it in wedges, and the holes are very tiny. It has a very nutty flavor, and it's softer in consistency than either Gruyere or Emmentaler cheese. For this recipe, you'll need a 4-ounce wedge of it, and make sure that it is well chilled. Before we get to the fontina, though, we're going to have to start by processing some Parmesan cheese, which we're going to use to decorate the gougère with. So with the metal blade in place, start the motor and drop 1 ounce of Parmesan through the feed tube, and then process this for 45 seconds. After the Parmesan is processed for 45 seconds, it should be finely chopped, so just simply remove it from the work bowl, transfer it to a small bowl, and then add a teaspoon of paprika and just stir the two together to mix up. And then this will be all ready for us to use at the end of the recipe. Then put the medium shredding disc in place, and as I said earlier, make sure that the fontina is very well chilled. Put it in the feed tube, and then use practically no pressure to process since it is such a soft cheese. There. And then empty the work bowl and then reinsert the metal blade, and then we will come back to this a little bit later. In the meantime, you have to get ready 1 cup of water and 1 stick of butter and a half teaspoon of salt. You want to bring this mixture to a boil in a 1-quart saucepan over high heat. Make sure that the butter is thoroughly melted and the mixture is very hot, as you can see here. Then take the pan off the heat, immediately add 1 cup of flour, and then stir this very well with a spoon to make sure that the flour is well incorporated, and then you return the pan to heat. And what we're doing now is we're making the basis for the puff shell dough. Now, puff shell dough is used to make cream puffs and to make gougere, and all puff shell doughs start out this way, with a mixture of butter and water and then flour. The idea is to stir and cook this mixture, and it's now nice and very thick. And you want to make sure that you cook it to drive off excess moisture just until this dough begins to film the bottom of the pan. You can see that it's doing that. You see how it's filming the bottom of the pan right there. Give it a couple of more stirs, and then put it into your food processor work bowl, just like that. And then you want to process this for about 15 seconds. Even though this is a hot mixture, you don't have to worry about damaging the processor work bowl. And this 15 seconds is just to smooth everything out. Then add the shredded fontina, a teaspoon of dry mustard, and a half teaspoon of pepper. Process those for a few seconds. And then add 4 large eggs all at one time. And this is where the processor does such a wonderful job of saving time and elbow grease. We'll process this for 30 seconds. When I used to make puff shell dough, I would have to beat each egg in individually by hand, and then it would take me several minutes for each, and the processor just does it in about 30 seconds. And you want to make sure that the mixture is very smooth. So scrape the work bowl again once or twice, and if you see some egg that isn't mixed up, process again. There. And now you see this is a nice, thick, eggy mixture, and now we're going to be ready to shape the fontina gougere. But before I do that, let me show you the pan that you're going to need. This is a 14 by 17 inch baking sheet that's been lined with parchment paper. You could use aluminum foil if you wanted. Butter that foil or parchment paper, and then take an 8-inch round cake pan, butter the sides only, and then you just plop this cake pan bottom side down right in the middle of the sheet, and then this is going to act as the center of our fontina gougere wreath. A gougere is a wreath. And now what I'm going to do is to transfer this gougere mixture into a pastry bag, and I'll show you how to shape this gougere after it's been put into the pastry bag. You pipe continuous loops of this gougere mixture through the pastry bag. I fitted it with a star tip about 1/2 inch diameter. You can see what I'm doing. You try to keep away from the side of that 8-inch pan that's in the middle, although it is buttered, so if it does stick, you don't have to worry about unsticking it. And this way, by shaping the gougere this way, it's going to be very, very pretty. And if you don't have a pastry bag, you can still shape the gougere by using tablespoons. So use large tablespoons and shape about 14 to 16 large mounds of dough touching each other. Then let's see if I'm going to make this right to the edge here. There, that's the last of the gougere batter. Then you bake this in the center of a preheated 400-degree oven for about 30 minutes until it's a rich brown color. You can see how nicely this gougere has risen and puffed and browned, and it is hot, so I'm going to use a couple of mitts to get rid of this cake pan here. And we're not done yet, because we're going to add more flavor and glamour to this gougere. I have a mixture here of 1 tablespoon of Dijon mustard mixed with a tablespoon of dry white wine. You brush this all the way on top of this gougere, and this will give a wonderful, wonderful tang and bite. It's a nice thin coating, and this also is going to act as kind of a glue for the Parmesan paprika mixture that I had prepared earlier, one of the very first things I did for the recipe. So then you sprinkle this Parmesan paprika mixture right over the top as I'm doing. This is giving off a wonderful, wonderful aroma. And then you get this back in the oven for 5 minutes. When the gougere is ready, just look at what you have. You will be so proud of your achievement because you'll have this beautiful, beautiful wreath. It's crusty on the outside and very tender and custard-like, very much like a popover on the inside. And this is very hot, and so what you want to do is just simply slide it off the cookie sheet onto a serving board, let it cool for a few minutes, and then you can cut it into wedges, serve it with drinks, and this gougere will serve generously for as an appetizer for a cocktail party or for a dinner, at least 12 people. The feta cheese souffle I'm going to make has a wonderfully mild flavor, even though it has 4 ounces of feta cheese in it. It is great to serve as a first course at a dinner, or you can also serve it as a main course at lunch along with a green salad and fruit for dessert. You will need to make the souffle a 6-cup souffle pan, and I like to use this glass pan right here. This is an oven-proof glass pan. If you filled it with water right to the top, it would hold 6 cups. Make sure that you butter it thoroughly and then dust it all over with fine, dry breadcrumbs or cracker crumbs. And I find that the crumbs actually help the souffle to rise even more than just buttering the pan alone. So get that ready. Also separate 5 eggs. You will need 4 yolks and 5 whites for the souffle. So get those separated while the eggs are cold and let the whites come to room temperature. And to start the souffle, melt 3 tablespoons of butter over medium heat in a 1 to 1.5 quart saucepan, and then add 3 tablespoons of flour. And mix it all up thoroughly, and I'll tilt this so that you can see what I'm doing. You are making a roux, which is a flour and butter mixture, and the object here really is to cook the flour with the butter until the raw, pasty taste of the flour is gone. So this usually takes a couple of minutes, and the mixture should be very nice and bubbly. Then, off heat, quickly add 1 cup of hot milk, just all at once, and then whisk all of this together, and return the pan to heat. And as I'm whisking, within just a few seconds, you see, this mixture becomes a very, very thick paste. And this is a white sauce at this point, and after it has cooked for about a minute, then we can take it off the heat and add the seasonings: a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, an 1/8 teaspoon of white pepper, and a little bit of freshly grated nutmeg, about equivalent of 1/8 of a teaspoon. Whisk all of these things together. And then, in order to prevent a skin from forming on the sauce, take a piece of wax paper that you've lightly buttered and put it buttered side down right on the sauce, and it'll look just like that. You can just let it sit here at room temperature until you're ready for it. This sauce base should be warm when you next get to it. So I'm just going to leave this alone for now. And then I'm going to move over here to the processor with the whisk attachment in place. And the egg whites, 5 of them, are at room temperature. This is a standard size work bowl. Make sure it is very clean and dry, free of grease, and start the motor. And we'll whisk the whites. And at first you'll notice that the whites start to become frothy, and within about 30 seconds or so they begin to mount up. In another 30 seconds or so they become a nice opaque white and have increased in volume by 2 or 3-fold. And in yet another 30 seconds or so, they will become very opaque. The beaters will leave streaks in the whites, and there, that should do it. When the whites are done, just remove the whisk attachment and then test with a rubber spatula or plastic scraper. Look at that. You see it holds a nice peak when you lift it up, and the whites are stiff but not dry, which is what you want. And then you want to transfer these whites now to another bowl. Feta cheese is a salty Greek cheese that isn't only made in Greece, it's also made in Denmark and the United States now. You can buy it at the supermarket. It usually comes packed in brine. It's fairly firm, but when you pick at it like I'm doing right now, you can see that it is also fairly crumbly. Feta varies in saltiness, so I would taste various brands and then select one that you like the best. For this recipe, you'll need 4 ounces of feta, and with a metal blade in place, it's not necessary to clean the work bowl after the whites have been removed. Just crumble the feta right into the work bowl and add the yolks, 4 egg yolks, and then you'll want to process this until the feta and the yolks are smooth. So be sure that you stop the motor every so often to scrape the work bowl. These yolks are really very, very golden. Gives a beautiful color, and it will give a beautiful color to the souffle after it's baked. Make sure that you, whenever you're processing fairly thick mixtures, such as this feta and the yolk mixture, that you really stop to scrape the work bowl as necessary. And it's really hard for me to give you a guideline other than just to pay attention to what's going on in the work bowl, and you'll know that you've processed enough when the mixture looks very, very smooth. And it should only take you probably about 1 to 2 minutes of processing total. While that's going on, I'm going to go back to this sauce mixture. I've taken the wax paper off, and you see it's still warm, and it's very, very thick. Give it just a quick whisk. Just to make sure it's all smooth. And that now that this feta yolk mixture is all smooth, then I'm going to take this very thick, pasty roux and scrape it out of the work bowl and do a thorough job on this. And now we'll want to incorporate this into the souffle base along with a tablespoon of freeze-dried chives or 2 tablespoons of fresh chives. And let's just process this for about 3 seconds because we don't want to overdo it. And if we do overdo it, then it becomes very gluey because of the cooked roux. Then put your egg whites right on top. And then pulse once or twice. And you see how thoroughly that gets incorporated. Scrape around the side of the work bowl thoroughly to go all the way around. And then give 1 very quick pulse, just like that. The idea, of course, now is not to process out all of the air that you've whipped into the whites. Then, holding the blade in place from below, turn this souffle mixture into the prepared pan. And in the meantime, what you should do is adjust an oven rack to the lower 3rd position and preheat your oven to 400 degrees. And then after the souffle mixture is in its pan, immediately place it in the oven and decrease the thermostat to 375 degrees. And you bake the souffle until it is puffed and golden brown, about 35 to 40 minutes. The center should still be slightly soft, and be sure you serve it at once. So have fun working with cheese with your food processor. This is Greg Patton wishing you happy cooking and delicious eating.